She was 18 years old and she was pregnant. Her name was Sophie Martinez, and she just discovered that the person she loved most in the world, the father of her baby, had never actually loved her at all. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when she went home to tell her family. Before we start this story, I need you to understand something. This is not a story about judgment. This is not a story where we decide who the good guys and bad guys are. This is a story about how good people make terrible decisions. This is a story about how love can blind us. This is a story about what happens when someone chooses the wrong person to believe. This story will make you angry. It will make you want to scream at the characters for their choices. It will make you judge them harshly. And then it will ask you to do something much harder. Forgive them. This is the story of Sophie Martinez and her family. And it's going to teach you something crucial about what mothers are actually willing to do for their children. Let's begin. Sophie had grown up in a chaotic household. Her biological father had left when she was 5 years old. Her mother, Carmen, had raised her alone for 8 years, working long hours, coming home exhausted, doing her best. And then Carmen had met David. David had been charming. He'd been attentive. He'd been everything that Carmen needed after years of being alone. He'd showered Carmen with attention. He'd taken her to nice restaurants. He'd promised her that he would be there for her and for Sophie. And Carmen had believed him. When Sophie was 13, Carmen and David had gotten married. Sophie had been excited. She'd thought David would be the father figure she'd never had. She'd thought her family would finally be complete. But things had changed almost immediately after the wedding. David had slowly revealed himself to be controlling and dismissive. He'd made comments about how Carmen spent money. He'd made jokes at Sophie's expense. He'd gradually isolated Carmen from her friends. He'd created a dynamic where Carmen was always defending him and apologizing for his behavior. Sophie had watched this happen to her mother, and it had broken her heart. But Sophie had also been a teenager, dealing with her own confusion and anger and need for independence. And she'd started to withdraw from her family. By the time she was 17, Sophie was barely home. She was at school, at friends' houses, at her boyfriend's house. Anywhere but home. And the reason was simple. David made home feel unsafe. But she'd never told her mother that. She'd kept it to herself, thinking that her mother was happy and that was enough. Thinking that if she complained about David, she would be causing problems. She'd been wrong about that. Sophie's boyfriend was named Marcus. He was 19 years old. He was charming and fun and everything that Sophie thought she wanted. He'd told her that he loved her. He'd told her that they would be together forever. He'd promised her the world. And Sophie had believed him. They'd been together for a year when Sophie had discovered that she was pregnant. She'd taken 3 pregnancy tests, all positive. She'd sat on the bathroom floor of the apartment she shared with 3 girlfriends and had cried. Her first thought had been of Marcus. She'd called him immediately. She'd told him. And she'd waited for him to step up. She'd waited for him to say that they would figure this out together. Instead, Marcus had said, "That's not my problem." Sophie had thought she'd misheard him. "What? That's not my problem," Marcus had repeated. "I'm 19 years old. I'm not having a kid. I'm not dealing with this." "But it's yours," Sophie had said. "The baby is yours." "Prove it," Marcus had said. And then he'd hung up. Sophie had tried to call him back. He'd blocked her. She'd tried to reach him through social media. He'd unfollowed her. Within hours, it was like he'd erased her from his life. Sophie had sat in the bathtub and had cried. She'd felt more alone than she'd ever felt before. She'd felt like her entire life had just been derailed. She'd felt like she had no options and no one to help her. And she'd known that she had to tell her mother. Sophie had waited for a moment when David wasn't home. She'd found Carmen in the kitchen, doing laundry. Carmen had looked tired. She'd always looked tired these days. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something," Sophie had said. Carmen had put down the laundry basket. She'd looked at Sophie with the expression mothers get when they sense bad news. "I'm pregnant," Sophie had said. Carmen had stared at her daughter for a long moment. and Sophie had seen several emotions cross her mother's face. Shock, disappointment, fear, confusion. How? Carmen had asked. The usual way, Sophie had said, not meaning to be flippant but feeling defensive. Who? Carmen had asked. Marcus, Sophie had said. My boyfriend. Does he know? Carmen had asked. Yes, Sophie had said. He said it wasn't his problem. He blocked me. Carmen had sat down. She'd put her face in her hands. And she'd cried. Sophie had wanted to comfort her, but she'd also felt angry that her mother's first response was to cry, as if Sophie's pregnancy was something that had happened to Carmen. What are you going to do? Carmen had asked. I don't know, Sophie had said. I thought you could help me figure it out. Sophie, you're 18 years old, Carmen had said. You're not prepared for this. You're going to college next year. You have your entire life ahead of you. I know, Sophie had said. But I'm pregnant. So now my life is going to be different. We'll figure it out, Carmen had said. But Sophie had heard the doubt in her mother's voice. That night, David came home. And Carmen tells him. Sophie doesn't know what Carmen tells him exactly. But she hears the conversation through the thin walls of the house. She hears David's voice getting louder and angrier. A baby. David shouts. Sophie's pregnant. She is, Carmen says quietly. And who's the father? David demands. Her boyfriend, Marcus, Carmen says. Is he going to help? David asks. No, Carmen says. He left her. There's a pause. And then David says something that Sophie will remember for the rest of her life. Then she needs to leave. The conversation happens the next morning. Sophie is called to the living room. Carmen is on the couch. David is in the armchair. They look like they're about to conduct a trial. David speaks first. His tone is cold and measured. Sophie, your mother tells me that you're pregnant, David says. Yes, Sophie says quietly. And the father is not involved? David asks. No, Sophie says. Then I think it's time that you make some decisions, David says. You're 18 years old. You're an adult. You need to take responsibility for your choices. Sophie feels her stomach drop. She knows what's coming. I can't have a pregnant teenager living in my house, David continues. It's not appropriate. It's not what I signed up for. She's my daughter, Carmen says quietly. And you should have taught her better, David says coldly. But you didn't. And now we're all paying the price. Sophie watches her mother flinch. Sophie watches her mother shrink into the couch. So here's what's going to happen, David says. Sophie, you're going to move out. You can stay for 1 week while you figure out your situation. But after that, you're gone. Sophie feels like she can't breathe. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my concern, David says. You made this choice. Now you have to deal with the consequences. Sophie looks at her mother. She waits for Carmen to defend her. She waits for her mother to say that David is being cruel and unfair. She waits for her mother to choose her. Carmen doesn't say anything. Mom. Sophie says. Are you okay with this? Carmen looks at David. She looks at Sophie. And then she nods. Your stepfather is right, Carmen says. You need to take responsibility. Sophie feels something break inside her. Her mother, the one person who was supposed to love her unconditionally, has sided with David. You're kicking me out? Sophie says to her mother. We're asking you to be responsible, Carmen says. There's a difference. But there isn't a difference. Sophie knows this. Sophie knows that being kicked out of her home because she's pregnant is exactly what's happening. She goes to her room and she packs a suitcase. She doesn't cry. She's moved past crying. She's entered a state of shock where everything feels unreal. She calls her friend Jessica. Jessica's parents let Sophie stay with them for a week while she figures things out. And during that week, Sophie learns some hard truths. She learns that being pregnant is expensive. She learns that prenatal care costs money. She learns that childcare costs money. She learns that everything costs money and she has none. She learns that at 18 years old, she has very few legal rights. She learns that she can't get an apartment without a job. She learns that she can't get a job when she's visibly pregnant because employers discriminate against pregnant women. She learns that the world is not kind to 18-year-old mothers. And she learns that her mother has completely abandoned her. Carmen calls once during that week. She says, "Sophie, I'm sorry about all of this. I hope you know that I love you." But Sophie doesn't believe her. If her mother loved her, she wouldn't have sided with David. She wouldn't have kicked her out. So Sophie says, "I need to go," and she hangs up. And she doesn't call her mother back. The next months are the hardest of Sophie's life. She reaches out to her biological father, a man she barely remembers. He tells her that he can't help her but that he wishes her luck. He offers no money, no support, no acknowledgement that he might have any responsibility toward her. She finds a job working as a waitress at a restaurant. The work is physically difficult when she's pregnant. Her feet swell. Her back hurts. She's exhausted all the time. But she needs the money. She finds a shared apartment with 2 other women. It's in a rough neighborhood. The walls are thin. There's constant noise. But it's what she can afford. She goes to prenatal appointments alone. She takes childbirth classes alone. She reads books about motherhood alone. And with each step, she feels more and more isolated from the family she had. She thinks about calling her mother. But every time she thinks about calling, she remembers the look on Carmen's face when she sided with David. And she can't make herself do it. Her due date approaches. And Sophie realizes that she's going to give birth alone. She's going to become a mother without any family support. But then something unexpected happens. One of her roommates, a woman named Keisha, notices how much Sophie is struggling. Keisha has a daughter of her own. And she offers to be Sophie's birth partner. She offers to go to the hospital with Sophie. She offers to be there. And Sophie cries. Because someone is finally there for her. Sophie gives birth to a daughter on a Tuesday morning in November. She names her Lily. And the moment she holds Lily in her arms, everything changes. Because Sophie realizes that she will never do to her daughter what her mother did to her. She will never abandon her child. She will never choose a man over her daughter. She will never make her daughter feel unwanted. This becomes Sophie's driving force. She works harder. She saves money. She applies for government assistance. She builds a life for herself and her daughter. And slowly, painfully, she heals. 6 months after Lily is born, Sophie's mother calls her. Carmen's voice sounds different. It sounds small. It sounds broken. "Sophie, I need to see you," Carmen says. "No," Sophie says immediately. "Please," Carmen says. "There's something I need to tell you." Sophie almost hangs up, but something in her mother's voice stops her. "Fine," Sophie says. "I'll meet you. But not at your house." They meet at a coffee shop. Sophie brings Lily in her carrier. And when Carmen sees her granddaughter for the first time, she cries. "She's beautiful," Carmen says. "Yes," Sophie says coldly. "She is." "Sophie, I need to tell you something," Carmen says. "And I need you to listen before you respond." "Okay," Sophie says. And Carmen tells her story. She tells Sophie that David has been having an affair. She tells her that she found emails from another woman. She tells her that David has been stealing money from their bank account. She tells her that she's discovered that David was married before Carmen, and that his first wife also had to leave because David was controlling and abusive. "I was so blind," Carmen says. "I was so desperate to have someone love me that I didn't see what he actually was. And when you told me you were pregnant, instead of supporting you, I sided with him. I believed him when he said that you needed to be responsible. I believed him when he said that you were making bad decisions. You chose him over me," Sophie says. "I know," Carmen says. "And I will regret that for the rest of my life." Sophie feels something inside her cracking. She wants to stay angry. But she's also a mother now. And she understands, in a way that she didn't before, how complicated love is. How sometimes people make terrible choices for reasons that make sense to them at the time. Why are you telling me this? Sophie asks. Because I'm leaving David, Carmen says. And I wanted you to know that you were right. You were right about him all along. And I should have protected you instead of protecting him. Sophie looks at her mother. And she sees, for the first time in months, the woman who raised her alone for 8 years. The woman who sacrificed everything for her. The woman who made one terrible choice but who is now brave enough to acknowledge it. Mom, Sophie says, and she starts to cry. And Carmen reaches across the table and takes her daughter's hand. And they sit there crying, while Lily sleeps in her carrier between them. But the story doesn't end there. Because Sophie realizes in that moment that her mother was also a victim. Her mother was also manipulated. Her mother was also made to believe lies. And Sophie has to make a choice. She can stay angry at her mother for abandoning her, or she can forgive her for being human. It's not an easy choice. There are many conversations that follow. There is pain that needs to be processed. There are boundaries that need to be set. But eventually, Carmen becomes part of Sophie's life again. She meets her granddaughter regularly. She helps Sophie with childcare. She supports her as she finishes her high school diploma and then goes to college. And Sophie learns something crucial. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. Forgiveness means choosing to move forward instead of staying stuck in anger. 5 years later, Sophie is standing in front of a group of 18 young women. They range in age from 14 to 19. They are all pregnant or already mothers. They are all in various states of crisis, some homeless, some in abusive relationships, some completely alone with no family support, some struggling with mental health issues on top of everything else. Sophie looks at their faces and she sees herself. She sees the girl who was kicked out of her home at 18. She sees the girl who thought the world had ended. She sees the girl who didn't know if she would survive. But she also sees something else. She sees the mothers these girls are becoming. She sees the strength they don't yet know they have. She sees the potential that the world tried to tell them didn't exist. My name is Sophie, she says to the group. And I'm here because I was you. She tells them her story. Not the sanitized version. The real version. The version where she was abandoned by her mother. The version where she was alone in a hospital giving birth with no one holding her hand. The version where she didn't know how she was going to afford food or rent or prenatal care. She tells them about the nights she cried. The nights she thought about giving her baby up for adoption because she felt like she couldn't do it. The nights she felt like a failure. And then she tells them about the moment she held her daughter for the first time. She tells them about the way everything changed when she looked into Lily's eyes and realized that this baby needed her. That this baby believed in her. That this baby was counting on her to be strong. You think your life is over, Sophie says to the group. You think that you've made a mistake that you can never recover from. You think that society has decided what your future will be, and it's not going to be good. She pauses. She makes eye contact with each girl. But you're wrong, she continues. Your life isn't over. This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of a completely different story. A story that you get to write. One of the girls, a young woman named Maria who is 17 and 7 months pregnant, raises her hand. Did your family ever come back? Maria asks. And Sophie thinks about her mother. She thinks about the coffee shop where they reunited. She thinks about the tears. She thinks about the slow process of rebuilding trust. Yes, Sophie says. But not in the way I expected. My mother didn't ride in on a white horse and save me. My mother didn't make everything okay. What my mother did was harder than that. She acknowledged that she'd failed me. She took responsibility for her choices. And then she showed up consistently to help rebuild what she'd broken. Did you forgive her? Maria asks. Eventually, Sophie says. But forgiveness wasn't this magical moment where everything was suddenly okay. Forgiveness was a process. It was about learning to trust her again. It was about understanding that she was also hurt by the same person who hurt me. It was about recognizing that she was human and that humans make mistakes. Sophie sits down on the edge of the desk where she's been standing. I want to tell you something that nobody tells young mothers, Sophie says. They tell you that you need to be strong. They tell you that you need to take responsibility. They tell you that you need to figure everything out on your own because that's what being an adult means. She pauses. But that's not true, she continues. Being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone. Being responsible doesn't mean rejecting help. And being an adult doesn't mean that you can't ask for support. Being strong means asking for help when you need it. Being responsible means knowing when you're overwhelmed and reaching out. Being an adult means understanding that we all need each other. The girls listen. Sophie can see some of them crying. Some of them nodding. Some of them looking at Sophie like she's the first person who's ever told them the truth. After the support group ends, Sophie sits in the back office of the community center where she runs the group. Her supervisor, a woman named Patricia who's been in her corner since day one, comes in and sits across from her. That was powerful today, Patricia says. Thank you, Sophie says. I still get emotional when I tell my story. That's good, Patricia says. That means you haven't become numb to it. That means you're still connected to what you've overcome. Sophie nods. She thinks about how different her life is now compared to 5 years ago. She's no longer living paycheck to paycheck. She has an apartment. She has benefits. She has a job that she loves. She has colleagues who respect her. But most importantly, she has Lily. And she has her mother. How is your mom doing? Patricia asks, as if reading Sophie's mind. She's good, Sophie says. She's started a support group for women who've left abusive relationships. She's helping other women recognize the signs that I recognized but that she didn't see. That's beautiful, Patricia says. Your mom is transforming her pain into purpose just like you are. Sophie smiles. She never thought she would say this, but she's proud of her mother. Not because her mother didn't make mistakes. Carmen definitely made mistakes. But because her mother is doing the hard work of acknowledging those mistakes and becoming a better person. That evening, Sophie picks up Lily from kindergarten. Lily is 5 years old now, a bright, confident, articulate child who shows no signs of the poverty and struggle her mother endured during her early years. This is something Sophie is particularly proud of. She's made sure that Lily never feels the weight of their past struggles. Lily goes to good schools. Lily has nice clothes. Lily has ballet lessons and piano lessons and art classes. Lily has the childhood that Sophie didn't have. But Sophie also makes sure that Lily understands where her mother came from. She tells Lily age-appropriate stories about how hard Sophie had to work. She tells her that she was a very young mother. She tells her that some people didn't believe in her, but she believed in herself. When Lily asks questions, and Lily is a very curious child, Sophie answers honestly. Not in ways that are inappropriate for a 5-year-old, but honestly. Why didn't Grandpa David like us? Lily asked recently. Because David was not a good person, Sophie had said. He was mean to me and to Grandma Carmen. And when people are mean, sometimes they hurt the people they love. That wasn't about you. That was about David being broken inside. Is he still broken? Lily had asked. I don't know, Sophie had said. I don't see David anymore. But I hope that he learned to be better. That night, Sophie's mother comes over for dinner. Carmen now does this twice a week. She brings groceries. She helps with Lily's homework. She tells Sophie about her day. It's a normal, unremarkable thing. A mother having dinner with her adult daughter and granddaughter. But to Sophie, it's extraordinary. Because 5 years ago she never thought this would happen. Over dinner, Carmen tells Sophie about a woman in her abuse survivor support group. The woman's daughter has just had a baby and has reached out to the mother for help, but the mother is terrified of messing up again. She asked me how I knew how to forgive, Carmen says. And I told her the truth. I don't know. I just decided that holding on to anger was worse than letting it go. I just decided that my daughter was more important than my pride. Sophie listens to her mother and she feels something shift inside her. She realizes that her mother is still healing. That Carmen is still learning. That Carmen is still growing. What did you tell her? Sophie asks. I told her that forgiveness is not about saying that what you did was okay, Carmen says. Forgiveness is about acknowledging that you were wrong, truly apologizing, and then spending the rest of your life trying to do better. And I told her that her daughter might not forgive her right away. But if she's consistent and if she's genuine, there's a chance that someday her daughter will understand. Carmen pauses. She reaches across the table and takes Sophie's hand. I'm so grateful that you gave me that chance, Carmen says. Sophie feels tears forming. I'm grateful too, she says. Later that week, Sophie meets with her therapist. She's been in therapy since college. Working through her abandonment issues, her trust issues, her complicated feelings about motherhood and family. Her therapist, Dr. Sarah, asks her how she's feeling about everything that's happened. Honestly, Sophie says, I'm scared sometimes. Of what? Dr. Sarah asks. Of repeating my mother's mistakes, Sophie says. Of not being there for Lily when she needs me. Of choosing the wrong person over my child. Of becoming so focused on a relationship that I lose sight of what matters. That fear is actually healthy, Dr. Sarah says. It means you're aware of the patterns. It means you're vigilant. But I want you to understand something, Sophie. Your mother's mistake wasn't that she was a bad mother. Her mistake was that she let someone manipulate her into believing that her daughter was the problem instead of the person who was actually causing problems. How do I make sure I don't make that mistake? Sophie asks. By staying connected to your instincts, Dr. Sarah says. By listening to your daughter when she tells you that someone is making her uncomfortable. By remembering that your child will always be more important than any romantic relationship. And by being honest with yourself about whether someone is changing your relationship with your daughter in negative ways. Sophie thinks about this. She thinks about how she will never let anyone, no matter how charming, no matter how much she loves them, make her doubt her daughter. She thinks about how she will always believe Lily. She thinks about how she will always choose Lily. I understand, Sophie says. A few months later, Sophie receives an award. The community center recognizes her for her work with teen mothers. They give her a plaque. There's a ceremony. People she's helped stand up and talk about how Sophie changed their lives. One of those people is Maria, the young woman from her support group who was 17 and pregnant when Sophie first met her. Maria is now 20 years old and is working toward her GED. She's in a stable housing situation. She's getting child support from her baby's father. And she's planning to go to college. Sophie showed me that my life wasn't over, Maria says in front of the crowd. She showed me that I could be a good mother and have a future at the same time. She showed me that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was strength. Sophie cries listening to Maria speak. She cries because she remembers being that girl, the girl who thought her life was over, the girl who thought the world had no place for her, the girl who thought she would be alone forever. And now here she is, 5 years later, using her pain to help other girls escape that same sense of hopelessness. That evening, Carmen attends the award ceremony. She sits in the audience and watches her daughter receive recognition for her work. And afterward, she hugs Sophie and she says something that hits Sophie deeply. I'm so proud of you. Not just because you've done well, but because you've taken the worst thing that ever happened to you and you've transformed it into something that helps other people. That's the kind of mother I should have been from the beginning. Sophie cries. You're a good mother now, she says. And that's what matters. What Sophie doesn't realize at first is how much her story is changing. She doesn't realize that other people are sharing her story. She doesn't realize that her experience is becoming something that helps people far beyond the support group she runs. One day, she gets a message from a woman she doesn't know. The woman writes, I was about to have my daughter leave my house because I was married to an abusive man. I thought my daughter was the problem. But I read your story and I realized that I was about to make a terrible mistake. I asked my daughter for forgiveness. I left my husband. And now we're rebuilding our relationship. Thank you for sharing your story. You saved my family. Sophie reads this and she sits down and she cries. Then she gets another message. And another. And another. Women writing to tell her that her story helped them. Daughters writing to tell her that her story helped them forgive their mothers. Mothers writing to tell her that her story helped them choose their daughters over men who were hurting them. Sophie realizes, slowly, that her suffering has had meaning beyond her own life. That her pain has become a beacon for other people. That by being willing to share her vulnerability, she's given other people permission to be vulnerable too. About 6 years after she was kicked out, Sophie has a conversation with her mother that fundamentally shifts how she understands everything that happened. They're sitting on Carmen's porch, the house that Sophie and David lived in, the house from which David abused Carmen, the house that Carmen eventually escaped. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been kicked out? Sophie asks. Carmen is quiet for a long moment. Yes, she says. I think about it a lot. What do you think would have happened? Sophie asks. I think I would have eventually lost you anyway, Carmen says. David was abusive. He was isolating me from everyone. He was getting worse every day. Eventually, he would have done something so bad that you would have had to cut me out of your life to protect yourself. And I would have ended up alone and broken and without either of you. Sophie sits with this. She realizes that her mother is right. By kicking me out, David actually accelerated the timeline, Sophie says. He forced me to survive on my own. He forced me to become strong. He forced me to build a life that didn't depend on him. He did, Carmen says. And I know that doesn't make what he did okay. But I want you to understand that sometimes terrible things happen and they actually become blessings in disguise. Do you think Lily is a blessing? Sophie asks. I know Lily is a blessing, Carmen says. She's the best thing that ever happened to you. And you would never have had her if you hadn't been kicked out. You would have married Marcus. You would have been trapped in an abusive relationship. Instead, you became a mother to the most beautiful girl I know. Sophie realizes that her mother is right about this too. As much as she's raged against what happened, and she has raged extensively, she also wouldn't change it. Because if it hadn't happened exactly the way it did, Lily wouldn't exist. So what you're saying, Sophie says slowly, is that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the catalyst for the best thing that could happen to us. I'm saying that sometimes we have to go through hell to become who we're meant to be, Carmen says. Sophie is now 28 years old. She has a master's degree in social work. She's written a book about her experience being a young mother. She's been interviewed by national media outlets. She's advocated for better support systems for teen mothers. She's also become something she never thought she would be, a voice for forgiveness. Because over the years, Sophie has learned that the stories people respond to most are not the stories about how badly someone was hurt. They're the stories about how someone found their way back to love despite being hurt. Her book, which is titled Still Here, tells the story of her experience being kicked out. But it also tells the story of her mother realizing what she'd done. And the story of them rebuilding their relationship. And the story of how that rebuilding became possible only when both of them were willing to be vulnerable. The book becomes a bestseller. Not because it's well written. Sophie is a social worker, not a professional writer. But because it's honest. It's real. It doesn't have happy endings where everyone gets exactly what they want. Instead, it has the kind of endings that are real. Complicated, messy, requiring continued work and commitment and forgiveness. Lily is 15 years old now. She's smart and kind and confident. She knows her mother's story. She's even read portions of the book. Are you upset with Grandma Carmen? Lily asks her mother one day. No, Sophie says. I was upset for a long time. But I realized that being upset at my mother was hurting me more than it was hurting her. So I decided to forgive her. Why did she do it? Lily asks. Why did she choose David over you? Because she was scared, Sophie says. She was scared of losing him. She was scared of being alone. She believed the things he told her about me. And she made a choice that she regretted. But I forgive her because she acknowledged what she did and she spent the last 10 years trying to make it right. Lily considers this. Do you think people can change? She asks. Yes, Sophie says. I think people can change if they want to badly enough. I think people can become different versions of themselves. but only if they're willing to do the work. On the 10-year anniversary of being kicked out, Sophie writes something in her journal. I used to think that being kicked out was the worst thing that could happen to me. I used to think that my mother's betrayal was the most painful experience I would ever have. But now I understand something different. What happened to me wasn't the worst thing that could happen to me. What happened to me was hard. It was painful. It was unfair. But it was also transformative. I survived being homeless as a pregnant teenager. I survived giving birth alone. I survived raising a child in poverty. I survived all of that, and I didn't just survive it, I became stronger because of it. My mother's betrayal wasn't the most painful experience I had. But it was painful in a way that taught me something essential. That people we love can hurt us and we can still love them. That forgiveness is not about forgetting what happened, but about choosing to move forward. That family is not just about biology but about showing up for each other, even after we've failed. I'm grateful for my pain now. Not because it felt good, but because it made me who I am. It made me a mother who is present for her child. It made me a social worker who can help others. It made me a woman who knows the value of second chances. And it made me grateful for my mother, not in spite of her failures, but because of how she's handled them. She's shown me that it's never too late to change. That it's never too late to apologize. That it's never too late to ask forgiveness and to work toward making amends. That's the most important lesson this whole experience has taught me. Years after all of this, Sophie starts a second program. It's not a support group for young mothers. It's a support group for mothers who made the wrong choice. It's a place for mothers like Carmen. Mothers who chose a man over their child. Mothers who didn't believe their child. Mothers who made mistakes that they deeply regret. In this group, Sophie shares her story from a different angle. She talks about what it was like to be abandoned. But she also talks about how grateful she is that her mother found her way back. She talks about how her mother's willingness to acknowledge her failure made all the difference. If my mother had ever said, I was justified in kicking you out. You deserved it. I did the right thing. I would never have forgiven her, Sophie says to a room full of women who look haunted by their own choices. But my mother said, I was wrong. I should have protected you. I didn't, and that was a terrible mistake, and I'm sorry. And that apology, that genuine, heartfelt acknowledgement of failure, that made forgiveness possible. Sophie pauses. She makes eye contact with each woman. If you're here because you made the wrong choice, if you're here because you failed your child, if you're here because you chose someone else over your child, I want you to know, it's not too late. It's not too late to apologize. It's not too late to make amends. It's not too late to show your child that they matter to you more than anyone else. She pauses again. Your child might not forgive you immediately. They might not ever forgive you. But if you're consistent and if you're genuine and if you put in the work, there's a chance. There's a chance that your child will understand that you're human. That you made a mistake. That you're trying to do better now. One of the women in the group, an elderly woman named Margaret, raises her hand. I haven't spoken to my daughter in 15 years, Margaret says. I don't know if I can fix what I broke. You don't need to fix it, Sophie says. You just need to reach out. You just need to say, I'm sorry. And then you need to show up consistently for however many years it takes. And maybe your daughter will forgive you. And maybe she won't. But at least you'll know that you tried. Margaret nods. And after the group ends, she tells Sophie that she's going to call her daughter. Sophie doesn't know if Margaret's daughter answers. She doesn't know if Margaret's family heals. But she knows that Margaret is going to try. And that's what matters. By the time Sophie is 40 years old, she's helped thousands of young mothers navigate the system. She's helped hundreds of families reconcile after abandonment and betrayal. She's written multiple books. She's given talks at universities. She's become a nationally recognized expert on the topic of family reconciliation and second chances. But the thing she's most proud of is not her professional accomplishments. The thing she's most proud of is that Lily is now a young woman who is kind and confident and secure in the knowledge that her mother loves her unconditionally. Lily is in college now, studying psychology. She's planning to become a therapist so that she can help people heal from family trauma. The same kind of trauma that her mother experienced. I'm becoming a therapist because of you, Lily tells her mother. Because of what happened to me? Sophie asks. Because of how you handled it, Lily says. You took something terrible and you transformed it into something meaningful. You didn't just survive being abandoned. You became someone who helps other people survive abandonment. That's what I want to do. That's the legacy you're leaving. Sophie cries. Because she realizes that her pain has become her daughter's purpose. That by refusing to let her suffering destroy her, she's given her daughter a roadmap for how to handle difficult things. On Sophie's 40th birthday, her mother hosts a party. Carmen invites all of Sophie's friends. She invites the women from Sophie's support groups. She invites the young mothers Sophie has mentored. She invites social workers who've learned from Sophie. She invites therapists who've used Sophie's books in their practice. There are probably 50 people there. And Carmen takes the microphone and she says, I want to tell you all a story. 10 years ago, I made one of the worst mistakes of my life. I chose a man over my daughter. I abandoned her when she needed me most. She was 18 years old and pregnant, and I chose to believe lies instead of believing my daughter. But my daughter, this extraordinary woman that you see before you, my daughter forgave me. Not because I deserved forgiveness, but because she's big enough and strong enough and human enough to understand that people make mistakes. And in forgiving me, she taught me something crucial. That it's never too late to change. That it's never too late to become a better person. That it's never too late to show up for the people you love. So I want to say something that I should have said 22 years ago, when my daughter was kicked out of my house. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. And I'm grateful that you gave me the chance to be your mother again. And Carmen steps down and she hugs Sophie. And the entire room stands up and applauds. Sophie stands there in her mother's arms, feeling the weight of everything that's happened. All the pain, all the struggle, all the survival, all the forgiveness, all the rebuilding. And she understands, finally and completely, that her story is not a story about being abandoned. Her story is a story about being chosen, again and again, by people who decided that she was worth fighting for. By her daughter, who needed her to be strong. By her mother, who decided to change. By herself, who refused to give up. That's the legacy she's created. That's the impact she's had. Not because she was perfect, but because she was brave enough to be broken. And then brave enough to heal.